Hey, Unicorn Nation, Max Finn here, your host for the Unicorn Perspective. Today we have another special episode, just like every week. I got to sit down with a new friend and somebody I consider a mentor of mine, Rich Schefren. Somebody I really got introduced to in the last few months personally. I've known about him for a long time because he's an absolute kind of legend, godfather, OG of our industry. He's been around for quite some time. He's seen trends and fads come and go, and he's continued to be a kind of a powerhouse power player in the industry, consulting with and coaching some of the biggest names in industry. He's been a big consultant with Agora. He's coached Russell Brunson, Ryan Dice. So a lot of the guys that are now kind of the rock stars in our industry, Rich was the guy they went to when they were getting started, and he is just a wealth of information and wisdom and advice and knowledge. Every time I get to talk to him, which luckily it's been almost like on a bi-weekly basis, we've chatted ever since we got introduced. He just shares some amazing stories and just insight and ideas and ways to think about things that I never thought about before. So we went a little long in this interview because there's just so much stuff to cover, so many great conversations and threads and avenues for us to go down. So again, this guy needs really no introductions. I'm not going to go through all of his accolades and all that stuff. You can Google him. He's got tons of great books out there. He's got a lot of stuff written about him. So you can go learn all you want about them. You probably already know Rich, but I'm going to dive right in because it's such a great interview. And again, went a little over, so it's a longer interview, but it is packed with amazing stuff, fun stories, and I just I'm listening to it again because there's so much good stuff in it. So enjoy, and I'll see you on the next one. All right, we got Rich Schefren today. So this is like the craziest thing ever for me happened like 3 months ago, 4 months ago, when I got introduced to you, Rich. And I thank you, Nick Shackelford, for connecting us. That was a great introduction, and Rich and I kind of hit it off. But like Rich, I remember the first time we spoke. At the end of it, you asked, "Hey, would you be interested in coming to this event that I'm putting on, this mastermind live stream thing?" And he's like, "Yeah, there'll be a bunch of great guys there. We'll have Russell will be there, Ryan Levesque will be there, and Todd Brown will be there, and Jeff Walker will be there, and Dean Graziosi and Neil Patel, and like the whole list." And I was like, of course I will be there. Like that's not a serious question. It's amazing that to be in the same room as these guys when I for years and years and years when I started my career, like reading all their stuff and buying all their stuff. So what I wanted to start with, because I haven't even
Right.
asked you this, is
Okay.
how the hell do you build those, like the amount of relationships that you have and the ability to get all of those people to decide to voluntarily fly down to Florida and spend 24 hours hanging out, doing a live stream, masterminding. Like I don't know anybody that could do that. So I just want to know, like, how does it even happen?
Um, well, I guess a lot of it is unconscious, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, there's no tactical thing per se, but
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of stuff that I picked up over the years that just, I guess, makes it so that I don't burn any bridges, right? So the first thing is that um, s- someone shared a quote with me that I think is extremely true, and it is that you learn a lot more about someone on the exit of a relationship than the entrance of a relationship,
Yeah.
and you learn their true character, right? And I've always tried to keep my side of the street clean, like no matter, like even if someone screws me over, like I'm going to do what I said I was going to do, just because that's what I said, right?
Hmm.
But I also think that there must be, I guess, I don't know, like I'll come at it like circular, because I'm gonna give you an answer to something else
Love it.
that then I think I can translate into this. So another thing that's probably because what I think is more mind blowing is that than that is that like I had on my wall when I first got involved in direct response, right? I'd gone to like a Dan Kennedy event and a Halpert event and a Jay Abraham event. And so I had pictures on my wall, like, because I asked to take pictures with them, right? Like
Yep.
of me and Dan Kennedy, me and Gary Halpert, me and John Carlton, me and Jay Abraham. And over time, each of those guys became very close friends of mine and mentors. And to the point that Jay Abraham, Clayton Makepeace, who just recently passed away, and Mark Ford, one of the owners of Agora, all became like surrogate dads to me. And, that wasn't like, there was no plot for that. Like it just happened. And I think it happened because I was always in search for a father figure. Like I didn't have a like the relationship I had with my dad wasn't so solid.
Hmm.
So like when I reflect back on it now, like even my like friends' parents, I was closer with them. Like I had a surrogate family. Like I would go over to my friend's
Yeah.
house for dinner at night, right? So I think like there was a part of me that was just unconscious searching for a father figure, right? And these guys were all like about 20 or 30 years older than me. And so I just kind of gave off, I guess, the right energy that made them kind of mesh, right? And so it must be something like that as well. I I'm a weird friend to have because I'm generally not that social. I'm kind of an introvert. I tend not to reach out very often, but I think I'm also someone that will do anything for a friend, and I assume that it works the other way. And more often than not, it doesn't. But I still assume it.
Hmm.
And I actually just read this book, Driven. Have you heard of it?
I haven't, but I'll add
It's,
it to my list.
yeah, so it's about the ADD mind.
Okay.
And Jay Abraham recommended it to me because he's like, oh, they wrote a book about us because like he really identified with it, and I read it and I agreed with him. And there's a part in it that talks about like because of the I forget the name of the part of the brain, but the back part of the brain. So not the prefrontal cortex, because the prefrontal cortex is a little bit skewed in the ADD brain, and it's the back part that is more active. And because of that, for some reason, uh, like how friendships are perceived, how the environment is perceived is different. And so part of the book, they were talking about that with that type of brain, you're going to probably often be disappointed because you're looking for a wolf pack versus like a pack of deers, right? Like
Mhm.
if one deer sees trouble, just runs away, and then they all run away. Whereas a wolf, if it sees trouble, like howls, and then all the wolves come because they all have each other's back,
Yeah.
right? Like I think I automatically assume like whoever I'm talking to that we're part of a wolf pack, like incorrectly so,
Hmm.
right? And over the years, to protect myself, and this is way later, so I've all those friendships that you're talking about, I'm already made. But like later on in life, after getting screwed enough times, I recognized that I had to keep arm's distance from people in the beginning because I don't know, like I've never dated two girls at the same time. Like I don't know how to do that. Like I
Hmm.
just like I wouldn't even know how to I'm all in. I'm all in all the time with right like whoever I'm with. So I wouldn't be able to do that because I'd be telling both of them how much I love them, how much I want to like spend it. Like I don't know how to date. I don't know how to like I'm just hurting. So I think so what I've done in like long term is just like now I don't assume that right from the get go. I kind of keep people at distance and like make sure that there's nothing that comes up that doesn't make sense, like a story, and then
Changes.
and when I
Yep.
feel comfortable enough that like okay, I can release my guard because I know that as soon as I do, now I'm telling that person everything. I share too much information, like I'm just like that. So I think it's partly that, and then I guess like I bring something to the table. I mean, at the end of the day, like the benefit is that I have a unique perspective, and so that probably also is like I'm a good person to bounce stuff off of, and I think that makes it work. So I'd say it's that. I mean, I've coached some of them, but I wouldn't say the majority of the people I know I've coached. So I think it's that. And then to give credit where it's due, I think also just my alignment with Agora certainly doesn't hurt. So I think it's a combination of those factors, but I wouldn't say it was any one particular thing. And I guess it was also just being at the right time at the right place. I'm a big fan of this concept called distinctions, and I think I first like came across it when I took like Landmark or something like that because they really talk about distinctions, right? And distinctions are like concepts created out of language. And so, if I walk through a forest, I know nothing about trees, like
Mhm.
zero. And so I just see trees and that's it. But if I spent a full day like walking through a forest with a forester and they pointed out like that's a maple and you can know a maple because of this and that's a whatever kind of tree and you would know it and this you could tell if they're healthy because of that, then every trip through the forest from that day forward would be different than before because I would see things that I hadn't seen before, right?
Yep.
And because I could see things that I couldn't see before, I could now do things that I couldn't do before. So
I like that. Yep.
distinctions like live in language, right? And allow you to do things. And same like, if you're looking up at the night sky, I don't know anything about astronomy, but if an astronomer pointed everything out, like I'd start noticing the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, like whatever else you could, and maybe I could navigate because I knew where the North Star is. So this concept of distinctions is really powerful because of what it allows you to see. And what allowed like the early group of internet gurus to be gurus was that we got online having known direct response. So we knew like lifetime value, cost per acquisition, like all these concepts that most people didn't know. So when we looked at something, we already saw those things, like just in the way we saw things, right? Like versus someone else looking at things who didn't know direct response, like they wouldn't, the concept of like acquiring a customer at a loss and then like making it up in a back
Doesn't
end,
make sense.
like
Yeah.
it's foreign, right? Whereas like for us, that's like we see it because we had already learned it, right? Like so I've always been fascinated by distinctions and I wanted to like create a course on distinctions, like but I don't even know where I would start. But that's how like the original internet gurus all got started. And then teaching people those like all those concepts in addition to business strategy and all that kind of stuff was what like I started out with in my coaching program. But I always wanted to create a program just on distinctions because I just think it's like so powerful. And if I would think that in any career, like when someone's really sophisticated, like a ton about media buying, I know close to very little, and that's even probably being generous. And you probably have a lot of distinctions about like what a winning campaign looks like. You could tell pretty early,
Yeah.
where it might take me like a long time, right? Because I don't even know what I'm looking for. And so I would imagine that in any area of expertise, like if someone could know what the distinctions are and transfer them, it might be a much faster way of actually gaining expertise. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's probably a long answer, but
No,
and not
I
exactly the answer.
I love it. No, it wasn't even so much to get an exact answer because I don't think there if what I found interesting is that there are certain people who have gifts for certain things, and I struggle with this a lot with teaching, and I'm this is more of like an open ended question to you because you have a lot more experience teaching. It's like there are certain things, and maybe it's because I'm getting more cynical, maybe it's because I don't know what's happening with me, but I feel like when I first started out and kind of got forced into teaching, it kind of we talked before we went live, I kind of got pushed into it. I didn't really choose to do it. It kind of just happened and I went with it.
Right.
um I believed that there was a way to basically take everything that I had done that had been successful and package it in a way that anybody could just go through it and they could have that success. And I think there are a lot of pieces that you can package and put into templates and structures and formats and SOPs. But there are certain things, especially nowadays with media buying and marketing, that are almost intangible, that are very hard to explain. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
a disconnect between kind of your gut and your part of your brain that comes up with words and how to explain things. Right? I forget who I was reading, but it was like when you ask somebody, what do you love about your kids, or what do you love about your wife or your husband, whoever it might be, a lot of people say things that can apply to anybody. It's like, well,
Right.
they care for me and they're outgoing and they take care of me when I do this. It's like, but don't a lot of people do that? It's like, what's the
Right.
difference? And you can't. There's not that word to explain that gap of just how intense that difference is. So going back to like what you do, it's like if you could put into words how to build a world-class network where you can basically, make phone calls and get the greatest minds in internet marketing over decades to all fly down to an event, like people would be doing it all the time. It just there's something there that you can't put your finger on as to like this is the way to do it. Just like you started what you were saying. So I'm curious, like from a coaching perspective, a teaching perspective, do you believe that there are elements that are just like natural gifts that can't be taught, can maybe be enhanced, but like there's always going to be a gap there?
Yeah, there's always going to be a gap, and I guess like I maybe our paths to success were different, um, because like I struggled for a couple years online, right? And then when I realized that online business was just like offline business, then I became successful online. But what made me really successful was writing the manifesto and then that going viral and all that
Yep.
stuff. And that was totally unexpected, right? Like I literally had finished a coaching program and it was supposed to be a year long, but it was 18. It ended up being 18 months. Like that was my original group of clients, like Ryan Dice and those guys. And I had this guarantee that like by the time we're done, you'll be making double what you're making now, and you'll be working half as much. So you'll be 4xing like every hour you put into the business. And I only took 25 clients, and I had no idea what I was going to teach them. Like, but I ended up teaching them, and I covered everything I knew, and that ended up being 18 months. And everyone got the result. So I had to give no refunds, which was great because it was like 15 grand. And I couldn't imagine having to refund someone 15,000 after I spoke to them twice a month personally for an hour, like delivered content to them and all that kind of stuff. And so at that point, though, I had gotten out of the other online businesses. I was just coaching. And then that program ended, and I had this project with Agora coming up like 3 months later. So I had this 3 month window, and I was going to have no cash flow. And so I was like, well, I should do something for these next 3 months. I was like, you know what? I'll try and do like an 11-week program. That'll still give me time, like I have 12 weeks until the Agora thing. So I'll do an 11-week program, and I'll try and get some clients. And no one was really interested in business training at that time. Everyone was just interested in marketing, marketing, marketing. There was no business coaches online, as crazy as that sounds. And so I wrote the manifesto, and I didn't do well in English, so I didn't think I never thought of myself as a writer, and I put it out there, and I had some affiliate support, like some of the people that I'd coached, but it really just took on a life of its own. And instead of getting like 10 or 12 clients, I had thousands of people that wanted to be my client, and so like my total life changed. So my success came like in a leap, like big leap, right? And I can't teach someone to write a report at the right time with the right message at the right moment. Like I couldn't do that again. I mean, I wrote other reports, and some were very successful. My last report was probably the closest as far as success to the first one. So going into the coaching game, I knew that I'm not going to be able to teach you what I did, because if I could teach you what I did, I would just be a hit maker, so I think I came into it knowing that, but I've had so many successful clients that I certainly see differences. And I also have had some unique kind of eye-opening experiences too. So what I'd say is that one thing I noticed really early on was that most of the clients that I had, at least in the early days, I'd say like 80% had ADD, which I thought was just really fascinating.
That is interesting.
And maybe the internet just is easier for someone with ADD because there's so much going on or something, right? Other thing is that most of those people also, and I would put myself in this group, had a confidence that maybe was unfounded. I am going to be successful. I know I'm going to be successful. I don't know what I'm going to be successful at, but I will work hard. It's going to happen, right? It's just a matter of time, And a lot of people who became successful all had that kind of mindset, and it's not a common mindset.
No.
Most people don't walk around thinking that way, but I do, and most of those people did too. What was fascinating to me was this one time I taught this course on theory of constraints. This is back in 2008, and I called it GPS, and I wrote a report for it because my process was always. Have we ever talked about the mistake that I think most people make about in their business about their best self versus who they are?
I don't think so, but I would love to hear it, and I'm sure everyone listening would love to hear it too.
Yeah, so I try and actually share this concept as often as I can because I think it is the largest mistake I see, bar none, in entrepreneurs. And then it'll go back to my process because my process is derivative of this.
Got it.
So what I think is that most people, maybe they get it, maybe they don't. It's in your business, you make the rules. It's your kingdom. Right. And you can make the rules be anything that you want. If you want everyone to wear their underwear on the outside, you can make that rule. Now, maybe nobody will work for you, but you can make that rule. So most people, when they're designing their business of how their business is going to profit, what they're going to do, how it's going to work, they believe that they have to make it not taking themselves into account of who they really are. So they design a business for, you could say, themselves if they didn't have whatever issues that they have because I found that most people have some issues, right?
Yeah.
So for me, right, like I'm a procrastinator and a perfectionist, and those two things can lead to a lot of problems, right? So if I were to go and create a program, I don't know that it would ever get done. Like I could work on it, work on it, work on it, and I would always find more stuff to work on it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like I would. So even if I got over the procrastination, then the perfectionism would come in, and I would just keep working on it. And total ADD moment for a second. I read this great quote about perfectionism that hit me like a ton of bricks, and it's probably true, and I just don't really want to overthink it. And that is that perfectionism is trying to get the world to believe something about you that you don't believe about yourself, right?
That's deep. I like it.
Yeah. So anyway, so I was forced then, like, to design a business recognizing that I'm a perfectionist and I'm a procrastinator. And yet, like, at the end of the day, the business needs to put out stuff, right? That's done.
Yeah.
So what I did is I always sold my coaching programs in advance. Like I sold the program and then I would deliver it
Mm-hmm.
like, then because then my procrastination and perfectionism would be irrelevant. And
Yeah.
I literally like I would deliver the courses like let's say every Wednesday, the content. And I found that no matter when I started working on the content, it got done at 2:59 on Wednesday afternoon because at 3 p.m. we went live. And that was it, right? And but that was and while it was grueling, it was also effective, right? And so like I was able to outthink the flaws that I have in the design of the business. And I did the same like with money because I'm not money motivated. And so a business has to be money motivated. So what I did was I instituted like a really aggressive profit sharing, right? And I always had a small team. I never had like a huge team. So like 20% of the business, well, so what I learned from when I was in the hypnosis business and then 9/11 happened and I lost a lot of money chasing, like trying to rebuild and all that kind of stuff was that I didn't pull enough money out of the business all during the flush years. I just watched like the business bank account grow, like, into the millions
Mm-hmm.
and feeling really good about it. Uh, what I realized later on was that that was a mistake because writing checks to your business to keep it in business is very different than just draining the actual business account. So I wanted to never make that mistake again of leaving all the profits in a business. Even like I could put the money back, but at least this way it would be intentional. Like I'd
Yeah.
have to write the check and I'd have to think about it. And so the profit sharing I had was that like every month uh, there would be like a $50,000 buffer, right? Like break even plus additional 50,000.
Yeah.
Let me just make sure that my alerts are off. And and then from there, I would get 20% of the profits, and and then the team would get 20% of the profits, and my right hand guy who ran the business would get 10%,
Okay.
right? And so the team, which was like 8 or 9 people, 10 people, they would get the financials every week, and the profit sharing was paid every month, like 2 weeks after the month ended, and by like the second week or third week, if it was a decent month, we already were past break even, past the extra 50,000 like for testing and stuff. So now it's like they know that every dollar they bring in now, 20 cents is getting distributed to them, right? And so like they were scheming every week, like how do we maximize profit this week? I didn't go to those meetings. I found them boring, really. But like for them, that was like, they could make more money in 1 month than their entire salary on good months, right? Like, and I wasn't lowly paying people. And in addition to that, like the team then became very cohesive. And if someone wasn't pulling their weight, like they would come to me and say, we have to get rid of this person, right?
That's
So like,
directly impacting them. Yeah.
yeah. So like, because I'm also non-confrontational. So like the idea though is that like most entrepreneurs make the mistake of designing their business around like this ideal self, not recognizing who they are, their flaws, and designing their business to work based on who they are, not who they one day might be. And like that's pervasive. I haven't seen very many entrepreneurs who really get like they can do anything. And if they're going to do something, make it work for who they are, not what they'd like to be, right? Like I'd like to not have perfectionism. I'd like to not have these issues, right? I'd like to be a little bit more money motivated. I would have probably made a ton more money, but it just doesn't excite me. It's not really my main thing. So that would be what I'd say is like probably the biggest mistake I see entrepreneurs make. So my process was, write a report to change people's beliefs so that they would see why I think this thing is such a great thing, right? Like, so I wrote this report because nobody knew theory of constraints at that time. I wrote this report to show people that what's going to really define their level of success at the end of the day is not the potential they have, because most people don't live up to their full potential. It's going to be the constraints in their way of tapping into their full potential. And, the report laid it out, right, so that people came to that realization, because I was always trying to, it was realization before explanation. I always tried to get people to have the idea before I had to explain it, so to lay the groundwork, right? So they kind of figure it out. So then I taught theory of constraints, and theory of constraints is really difficult subject. Like it's like to really learn it, like the mapping, the logical. You have to learn logic. You have to learn a bunch of stuff to be able to do it, right? And I did it. I taught it because I really wanted to learn it. And once again, like I knew that I would never have the discipline to study the material like I would need to unless there was public humiliation on the other side of it.
Yeah, you were forced to.
So I taught this course. And what was fascinating to me was that every single person that I'm aware of that I spoke to, that I interacted with, I mean, there were a lot of people in the course, became a much better entrepreneur, period, just in every area. And I think that had a lot to do with, in some of the maps for theory of constraints, you're lining up cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, because you're looking for like, it's called the confluence of causes. Like, as you're mapping out cause and effect, you should see less and less causes so that you find like the root causes, right?
Makes
the
sense.
few causes that actually roll out to everything else. And for some reason, like, I guess most people don't think that way naturally. And so like maybe they thought one move ahead, and maybe now because they kept mapping cause and effect, they started thinking 3 moves ahead or something like that. But whatever it was, like that made people much better entrepreneurs. Like just like outside of theory of constraints, like, and they joined to learn theory of constraints and they learned it. But like this was just like a side benefit that I had no idea what to expect. Like to even expect it. So yeah, it's like I'm always fascinated by like how do people really like learn something like to the point where they can master it. I had this one idea that like I'm never going to do. So as much as I'd like to do it, I always wanted to write like a choose your own adventure book, but I wanted it to be a business book. And like the first half would be a choose your own adventure. And you'd have to make all these decisions about your business. Like, are you going to hire this person? Or you're going to keep looking, or are you going to like, right. And by the end of the book, you'd end up with some outcome. And then based on that outcome, it would tell you which chapters in the back you have to read because you made the wrong choices. Because I found that like case studies and doing stuff, in my opinion, is the best way to learn, not like studying, right? And when I learned copy, I used to write like an ad, and then I would send it to Bob Bly, and this was like 25 years ago, and he would make it better with track changes on. And so I could see like how he changed my words and how he changed my sentences. And I found that to be probably the best learning experience, because like I could see like what he did exactly to my words. And I'd be like, oh, I see. And it is more powerful that way. And so the case study approach and like that interactivity, I think makes a big difference as opposed to like sitting dry lecture, stuff like that.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
That's so for like on that note, I mean, there's so many threads we can go down here. Like, I know there's a big debate with kind of going to college, not going to college. That's a big thing, right? And I'm on the fence about it. I think it's, for me, it was a really smart move. I think I was very fortunate to not have to go into debt to do it. So I think if you're going into massive debt, like totally different story. But I went to a private boarding school for high school, and basically you apply to 20 schools. So that's in your world. Like you only apply to the Ivy League schools and the other top, 15, 16. So I went to Emory because it's the number 3 business school, and that was the best school I get into, and hated it. It was like the
Hmm.
worst 2 years ever because it was all lecture. It was all a lot of us TAs, and then
Right.
I decided to transfer to a small school called Babson up in Boston.
Batson. Yeah.
And Babson, all they do is entrepreneurship,
Oh wow.
and it was the
What's
best
that?
decision I made in my life because every class is taught by adjuncts who are real entrepreneurs or real VCs, and it's a lot of it is structured like cases. So I took a class. It's I think Inc. magazine ranked it as like the top entrepreneurship class in the country, taught by a guy named Len Green. He runs a family office in Jersey. They flew him up every week to teach the class. They would fly him up. He's on the board of Blue Buffalo, a lot of big companies. And every term, what he would do is he would send out basically a questionnaire to all the students that got in, and he created this like 10-page questionnaire over decades of working with entrepreneurs and top entrepreneurs, and he would pick from that like 12 of the students to become CEOs. So I was fortunate to get picked to do that. So you start the first day of the class, all the CEOs get up there, say here's $1 million in fictional money. Every other student does a 1 minute pitch, like a rocket pitch on who they are, and then you hire people. So it's like gym class picking people, but it's you're hiring for the entire
Right.
term. And
Wow.
every week, what you do is he gives you a case. Here's Sobe Beverages. Here's Blue Buffalo. Here's this company, and here's a problem they were encountering. Go home and solve it, and come back, and how you would have solved it. Right. The cool thing is each week he would bring the founders in from those companies,
That is
and they
cool.
would review it, share what they did. So the founders of Sobe and all these great companies, and they would help grade basically your cases. And it was like the most game. There was no textbooks, there was no exams, no nothing.
Right.
Um, and it changed my life because it was you spend an entire term thinking totally differently. Like your entire educational career, you're taught to learn in a very specific way, which is consume, 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 and regurgitate. Right, that's everything.
Right.
And this gave me the ability to start thinking creatively and to not have to follow a strict rule book. Like there's no rule book, there's no textbook.
Right.
It's how do you think you would handle this? Um, and so I agree, like what you talked about regarding cases and learning that way. It is game changing, and unfortunately, right now, it's most kids that are going to school like are being taught the total opposite way, and so they're coming out into the real world, and they're used to, hey, if I do this, it leads to this. It's a very structured environment. They realize, well, I did this, and the coronavirus hit, and everything
Right.
got thrown out. Right? It's like the rule books are thrown out. You got to be able to think creatively, and most people just give up. Most people just quit. They just throw in the towel because it's too hard. And I tried the one thing, it didn't work, and I don't know what to do. I'm not going to think about it. So it's really fascinating. I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on education right now?
Yeah, I have some interesting points I think on that. I also think, and I don't know what I haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about this, but there's also like there's street smarts and there's academic
Yep.
smarts. Um, I think I have street smarts, like based on like my life and like the mistakes I saw friends make, and I'd be like, why the hell would you do that? So like I have street smarts, and I guess over time I've gotten academically smart just because I have a love of studying and stuff like that. I like to figure stuff out, but like I still remember in high school, which is a whole nother story. Like I didn't go to school in ninth and 10th grade, so I basically kind of failed out. And my parents were like, my mom was in charge of my education in ninth grade, and I never went to class. And in 10th grade, my dad was in charge of my education, and I hardly went to class. And then by before I started 11th grade, my parents were like, look, and when you're done with high school, you got to get out of the house. You got to leave. And if you don't get into college, that's going to be on you, like not on us. And so you better figure it out what you're doing. And as soon as my parents did that, like I went from like failing to just getting straight A's, and it was more like I think an FU to my parents,
It's
more
amazing. Yeah.
so. Yeah, right. Like, but I did learn. I learned a lot in college, and I had like the relationship I have like with Jade Abraham and like Mark Ford. I had with some of my professors too. Like I used to go running with my accounting professor. Like, so I guess I was always like looking for that father figure, right? But and it's funny because it certainly made me more worldly. Like I learned a lot of stuff that I would have never learned, and it opened my eyes to like philosophy and all kinds of things like that. And I remember, and that served me really well. Like in random times, like I'd be in a meeting and someone might say something about like Schopenhauer and they'd get it wrong, and I'd be like, well, he actually said this, right? And just weird things like that,
Hmm.
right? But but I'd say that my oldest is going to college next year, and she's going to Syracuse. And I told her that if they are going to do it virtually, she's not going because I'm
Hmm.
not paying 50 to 60 grand a year for her to do
That's
online
insane.
classes. Yeah, because she could take the same classes for free, you know. So I don't really put a high value on like a degree per se, but I do think there's something about like living on your own,
The
meeting
experience.
friends. For me, college was a great time from the standpoint that I went to a school where I didn't know anyone because I thought I was going to transfer. So I purposely went because I had to, because of my grades, right? Like great 2 years, horrible first 2 years. I had to apply to a wide range of schools. And it was just really funny, like where I got in and where I didn't. It's like I got into NYU, but I got no, I got accepted to Ohio State on academic probation. I get like, and I was like, well, NYU's like 10 times better than Ohio State, but like, and it's just really weird. Um, but I did learn a lot, and I think that and when I went to school, because I didn't know anyone, I got to decide who I wanted to be. I didn't like the person that I was in high school,
Yeah.
and it was a total reset. It was like, okay, I am now going to meet new people, and they don't know who Rich Schefren is at all. And whether that was the real me or the person in college was the real me, or I don't know. I know that who I am today, right? But like my personality, I just decided I was going to be a very different person, and that was so amazing because I think that had I not had that opportunity, I don't know what would have happened, right? So I love it from that standpoint. And I probably was too immature, probably the first year or two in college. So I didn't probably learn as much as I could have. Like I kind of was, being on my own. But yeah, I'm a fan of it. I think it's ridiculously expensive now. I understand why it's ridiculously expensive. It's all about U.S. World News reports and
Yeah.
their rankings. And the way they rank the schools is not based on money spent to value of education received. It's value of it. Money spent is not even in the formula, and it's like value of the education plus the facilities, how nice the facilities are, how nice the dorms are, how nice and so it's pushed all these colleges to spend a ridiculous amount of money on stuff that's really kind of inconsequential. But if they want their rankings to be high, that's what they got to do. And the higher your rankings, the more applications you get, right? And you can charge more. And so it's kind of like created this thing where it's absolutely absurd. And I love how just total ADD moment, but I love how like they're talking about free college, like the left,
Yeah.
and I'm all for that if they nationalize the colleges. But like that's not even something that like they want to nationalize other stuff. Nationalize the colleges and then give everyone free education. But the idea of paying colleges 50 or 60 grand a
Is
year
insane.
is insane, right? Like that makes no sense. And yeah, I mean, I hate the idea of paying for all my kids to go to colleges at these costs, but I've been paying for private school and it costs the same amount anyway. So it's just a couple more years of it.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah,
the private school that I went to, like the boarding school, like I feel so bad for my parents. I mean, like the boarding school I went to in New Jersey, Petty, like I think now it's like 40,000 a year. It's like more than colleges were a few years ago, and that's like high school. And
yeah,
then there's private elementary and middle school. So you have
yeah,
parents now that want to get their kids in the best colleges. They're starting at third grade, and it's $10,000 a
yeah.
year there, and it's just it makes no
We have,
sense.
so we have three daughters between Kim and I, and one goes to one graduated from Horace Mann and went there her whole life, and that's like 50 to 60K a year. We have one in St. Andrews down in Boca Raton, and that's 50 to 60 grand. No, that's 35 to 40 grand a year. And then my daughter Ava, who's graduating this year, the one that's going to Syracuse, she goes to Birch Wathen in Manhattan, and that's like 55 to 60 grand a year.
Yeah.
It's like every year I'm looking at the price of like a Lamborghini, like
Yep.
just going out, like, and I drive a Jeep. But yeah, it's crazy how expensive it is, especially because you could learn it all on your own, but who's going to, right? There's this guy, I don't know if you ever heard about him. I don't know his name. He read a book. I think he wrote a book called Ultra Learning, but he got the equivalent of like an MIT computer science degree in a year by taking all the classes, and yeah, if someone's that motivated, they can do that, but most people aren't. But it seems like an awful lot to pay for the enhanced discipline. So
Yeah,
I
it
guess
doesn't make
well,
sense. It's the value of the education cannot possibly increasing at the same price increase. Like that's what doesn't
yeah,
make sense. Is that should be what it's connected to. It's obviously you have to factor in inflation and stuff like that, but the overall costs of maintenance and facilities and employment at the college like doesn't increase double digits every year, right? It just there's no baseline, and the big problem is it's backed by the government, right? So it's you have I think if you removed the backstop for all the lenders, that would overnight just change it, because right now it's no risk for anybody to write. Like how can you possibly write like Larissa and I going through the mortgage process right now?
right.
It's insane, especially when you're self-employed. The amount of work we've
Yeah.
done and stuff, it's insane. The planning you have to do to get a mortgage, but some 17-year-old kid can get a 6-figure loan
Mhm.
like nothing. Just, hey, I
Right.
think I'm going to be successful one day. I'm just going to party a lot for 4 years. I'm going to drink a lot. I'll go to classes. Here, give me $100,000. It's like, sure, I'll sign on it, because guess what? No matter what happens, you could die, and that loan is still that's going to be to your parents, and we're going to get that money at some point. It's crazy.
I had a friend that wanted to do like the equivalent of Shark Tank for people, and like basically like you come in front like while you're in college or right after college, and they size you up, and they'll pay off all your college loans for a percentage of your income
Yeah,
going forward.
that
Uh,
concept's actually becoming. I've seen a few people try to do that. It's an interesting concept. It's a very gray area, because it
yeah,
does get
kind
into
of buying
like
a
you're
piece of
buying a
someone.
person, but
Yeah,
it is interesting. It's like if you're a 21-year old coming out of school and you have $200,000 in debt, and somebody's willing to write you a fat check for 5% of your future earnings, and it's capped at certain amounts based on your income the first few years. Like a lot of people would be willing to take that to not have the burden for the next 10 years, especially if you go to med school and stuff like that. Like
yeah,
you're
insane.
spending decades
Yeah,
just piling up cash.
yeah. So I'd say like yeah, I have mixed feelings about it. It's an industry that's ripe to be innovated,
Yeah.
and decimated. And I know that like I don't know if I told you about this or not, but I read this article. I'm a big fan of this guy, even though politically, oftentimes I disagree with him. Scott Galloway.
Yep.
He's a professor at NYU.
Yep.
And yeah, did we
Big
talk
fan of
about?
Scott. We haven't talked
Okay,
about Scott, but I love it. I mean, again, he's politically like on one side, but like it's the content he puts out is amazing.
yeah. So if you haven't read this article, it's capitalists or cronyists, and he wrote this article about like what the government is currently doing as far as coronavirus, and he made some points that I hadn't even like didn't even like consider. And I love when like I used to like Charles Krauthammer, like the Canadian guy who was a Republican. He used to be a liberal, then he was a Republican, because he always like would bring in something that I had not considered
Yeah.
and be like, oh yeah, that's right. So what this article was about was that like what we're really doing, like we should let all these companies go bankrupt, not the small businesses, but the big businesses, because that's what happens in business. And in business, when a company goes bankrupt, it's generally not the employees that lose their jobs, and it's not like some of the creditors do lose, but people who really lose are the equity holders,
Yep.
and they deserve to lose. And so what we're really doing is we're saving the equity holders, and the equity holders are the baby boomers, and we're doing it at the expense of the next generation. So we're saving the wealth of baby boomers at the expense of the younger generation, because if we let those companies go bankrupt, one, we wouldn't be taking all this money and spending it, but also, besides all the money, is that we would let these companies crater back down to very low prices, which would let younger investors be able to
Invest
invest
in.
in those,
Yep.
and therefore, so he just made some really good points about it that I thought was really interesting. In that article as well, he talked about that him and a bunch of people are in the process of trying to innovate graduate school and charge 97% less by making it completely digital. And it takes someone I probably like a Scott Galloway to do it, who has like serious academic chops, right? Because like at the end of the day, yeah, there shouldn't be any difference in the certificate that you get, right, at the end, but it's going to take people of substance to be able to create those certificates outside of the academic
That means
process.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, because like I could certify someone, but what the hell does that mean?
Yeah. It's very interesting. No, I think it's that concept is fascinating where it's like at some point uh, Boeing didn't exist. At some point, American Airlines didn't exist. At some point, Delta didn't exist. Like these companies were created because there was an opportunity for another airline. So it's at the end of the day, it's shit happens. Sometimes very very
Yeah,
big things happen, and some businesses survive and some businesses don't. It is yeah, it's very fascinating how we've gotten to a point where basically like capitalism it's we operate in this capitalistic world where it's hey, good times, bad times, like companies fail, companies succeed, except there's been these kind of barriers added where if it gets really bad and drops below this barrier, then all of a sudden the rules of capitalism no longer apply because the argument made is that the devastation and the fallout from letting them fail will be so severe. And
right,
I guess I get it for we don't have to go down this rabbit hole too far because it's sometimes like banking and stuff people get really bored. But like in 2008, to some extent, it makes sense because there's everything was so deeply interconnected, and
right,
it was a financial problem, not a like a medical problem. Where if these dominoes started falling too fast, everything would collapse, and that to some extent makes sense why you had to get in there and actually bail out people. But like right now, it's just like it's fiscal monetary policies won't do any. It's not going to fix the problem. Like the problem can't be
right.
fixed by money, and like who's to say that keeping the airlines funded is going to even work? Like what if we write them a check for another $1 trillion
Right.
and this thing continues for 18 more months? Do we write them another like then you're already down the road and now you've already written a big check. Do you keep writing the check, or at some point do you say like we can't backstop every business just because they're a big business and they have a lot of employees? A lot of them already furloughed everyone. Like a lot of these
Yeah,
companies have already fired everybody. So who are we hurting at that point?
exactly. And like what Galloway said about the airlines was like there have been 66 bankruptcies of airlines in the
Yep.
last decade, right? And
Terrible
no, and
industry.
there's still airlines, right? And that the airlines have brought in 66 billion in cash flow over the last decade, of which 65 billion of the 66 was spent rebuying their stock, which like so that like the stock price would go up, management can make their big
Yep.
hefty option plays, and now like they need 25 billion from the government, and it's like, well, hey, like maybe we need to give them that 25 billion, maybe we don't, but we certainly all the people that made the decisions that like to spend all that money buying back the stock like need to be gone. Like, and that's the thing, like with all these things, there doesn't seem to be consequences. And that's the problem that I see with like capitalism, like, and what you're saying, like we're removing consequences. It's like everyone gets a trophy, right? It's the same thing on just the other side, right? Like we can't have anyone lose that much either. And I think that yeah, that's definitely not a good thing.
But just for big companies, right? Like
So,
that's what's crazy is there's there's these artificial lines that are being set for when do the rules of capitalism no longer apply, but then also how big of a company you need to be for the rules no longer to apply to you, and it's
yeah,
this weird box that like you and me, like luckily right now our business is doing very well, we're growing,
yeah,
but I have a lot of friends that lost all their clients overnight. They're an agency, every single client overnight. Like, do they get bailed? I mean, the SBA loan's already out of money, right? And it's a pain in the
right.
ass to go through that process. So it's interesting that the priorities always put on the biggest companies, and the argument made is always, well, they're so big and the ripple effect will be so massive. But it's all relative because okay, maybe one Disney going out of
Yeah,
business.
and Disney is one of the most evil companies around. And
Yeah,
we actually have friends that work for Disney who have already been furloughed, like, and now they're trying to decide should they quit, like, or start collecting unemployment, like what they should do. But yeah, so Disney furloughed everybody. They've now furloughed like 70,000 people.
yeah,
Whereas like, and they worked in the parks or what, I mean, they weren't like ticket collectors or whatever, but they worked somewhere in the parks or whatever. And while Universal, much smaller company than Disney, is paying all their employees 80% of their
Yep.
salaries and didn't furlough anyone, right? And it's like, yeah, these companies that grow that big, that. But I interrupted you. Like,
No, no,
it's
it's
like,
true. What I was saying though is like it's one Disney going under. Sure, that has one big impact, but there's millions of small businesses that all have 5, 10 employees. So it's similar. Hey, either you can bail out of Disney or you can put that money into small businesses, and that has much more of a direct kind of liquidation event for consumers and people that are spending money than going to Disney or Boeing or American Airlines. Even with the contingencies, they always find a way to find the loopholes and to buy back
right.
stock. Or the argument to be made is that I think Cuban was talking about this. Like, don't just make these loans. It's we're going to give you money. We want part of the company. Like the American
Yeah.
people gets part of the company. So at the very least, we as taxpayers can get part of the upside, right? Because when things
Right.
go back to normal and their stocks skyrocket and stuff, like why shouldn't we benefit? They get away with basically paying a low interest rate on a loan, and we take a
Yeah.
massive risk with very very limited reward. While the CEOs who get bailed out, they get no risk and they get all the upside.
And it's really to what Galloway says, who are we protecting at the end of the day? We're protecting the equity holders.
Yeah.
Because if the government took a piece, it would dilute all the people that own stock right now, right? And I guess Galloway's correct then on that point.
Yeah, and I never thought like I'm a pretty hardcore capitalist and a pretty like open free market person. And so it's weird for me to like say these things and be against it, but it's still it keeps happening. And at the end of the day, you got to just look at like history. You got to look at what's happening, the writing on the wall, and there's something fundamentally broken. And we unfortunately we live in a day-to-day minute by minute bubble where a lot of people aren't looking decades out and thinking about the ripple effect, because what you said
Yeah.
before, hey, the majority of people that own stock in the United States are people that are retired, people that are getting close to retiring. Like millennials and younger, millennials especially, because like we got double screwed because we kind of came out of college
Right
right
after
in
the fifth, right?
2008. So there were
Yeah.
no good jobs, and the stuff we paid for education, we didn't get the Goldman Sachs jobs or the big
Right.
bonuses. And a lot of us didn't have then any savings to invest in the stock market to benefit from the run up. And then my generation just started to kind of get things going because it's been, kind of towards the end of the bull market,
Right.
started putting money in the stock market and then got wiped out. And so like the long-term impact of that on generations is substantial because that's where wealth is developed. It's
Yeah.
developed by investing in real estate, in stocks. And if you have generations that just can't participate, like from a retirement perspective, that's devastating, especially because Social
Yeah.
Security and stuff probably will definitely not be there for us. So we're paying for that. We're paying for basically people that are retired to live. We're also taking hits because they're getting the stock gains. It's just like they're able to retire and do well. And obviously there's still plenty of people that are struggling, but it's like the long-term impact of this on generations is going to be really severe.
And I think that I agree 100%. And I think the removal of consequences also just really messes things up. And I say that maybe in a biased way because I had a midlife crisis in my 40s, right? And part of the reason I did was, I had achieved everything I wanted and I wasn't happy. And that was like, now what, right? But there was another thing that, like, kind of, as I dug deeper into my psyche, that I kind of realized about myself and was one of the causes that, like, I was always negatively motivated. Like, I work out not to have a six pack and to be ripped, although that could be the effect of it. I work out because I'm afraid of being fat
Yeah.
because I was fat as a kid, right? I made money so that I wouldn't be poor. And so that's why money isn't a motivator for me. Like, as soon as I have enough to just cover my expenses, it becomes no longer like the issue, right? And so I don't know how many people are negatively motivated versus positive. I would assume more people are negative because I would think that if more people were positive, they'd probably have more people would be in shape, more people would have money, more
Yeah.
people right? So we're motivated not like away from stuff. Like it's away from as opposed to towards. And for me, I was very much motivated away from. And so therefore, if you removed what I was running away from, like if I eat pretty healthy, but like if you removed my fear of being fat, I'd probably eat crappy. And like if you removed the fear of being poor, maybe I'd never be wealthy. Like so like I think that there's a consequence to removing the consequence.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's there are going to be outliers, right? There are going to be people that are motivated by like different goals they set and like
Right.
the positives. For me, I happen to be like on that side.
Right.
And there's some interesting. I'll tell you in a second. But like on the consequences side, it's totally true. It's that's why even, and again, this conversation go really down the rabbit hole of like
Right.
the benefits and kind of social welfare in that system. It's a very delicate line because there are people who genuinely need help that just
Yeah, there are people who
they have real
definitely do.
issues, real disabilities.
Yeah.
But anytime you put a system in place where it basically allows people to do nothing or gives them an excuse to do nothing because there's a safety net, there are going to be people who abuse that, and that's just the
Right.
reality. And we see that all the time, right? There's people that
Right.
use a system because it's needed for them, and that's great. But then there's people that abuse the system because it's a way for them to make more money and game the system. So it's fascinating that we think that it's okay to take that away from bigger companies, right? Because for me, it's like when I
Right.
was running my startup, like the very first startup out of college, I worked so harder than I've ever worked in my life, every
Yeah, I'm
minute,
sure.
every day, because
Yeah.
I put my entire life savings into it. I had every
Right.
dollar I'd ever made in it. That
Mhm.
was my paycheck. We had
Yeah.
employees, and so every day I was afraid of us going out of business. And
Right.
like, there's nothing that it's hard to be motivated more than the fear of
Yeah.
literally not knowing how you're going to pay for your rent and how you're going to pay for food and that
Yeah.
survival instinct. What I would say is interesting, at least for me, is it's you were talking like really really early when we first started talking in our call about the kind of the best entrepreneurs are the ones that are able to think, play a longer term game and not be demotivated by short term impacts. Um, for me, I think it's a similar thing. Like it's crazy how when you set different goals or when things need to happen because there's no other
Hmm.
way, somehow they happen. At least for me, like
Yeah.
you look a few years ago, it's only been for me maybe about a 3 year window where things have been going like this, where I've been like really comfortable financially and things have gone well. Before that, like for the 8 years before that, I was every single month was a struggle, like every single
Hmm.
month. And so I remember when I proposed to Larissa, like it took us over a year and a half to get married because I had no freaking clue. How am I going to pay for a wedding? Like it's no idea. Like as is for the ring, I had to max out a credit card and like I had to call TD and say like, okay, I got to pay an extra $200 so I can get the limit down far enough. Like it was a
Right.
whole thing just to pay for a ring. But like we set the date and this is okay. We set the date. It's this day. This is how much it's going to cost. And that year I made the most money I ever made and paid for the wedding, didn't have to go into debt for it. And then year after, it's like we've wanted to buy, do a house for a long time.
Right.
And it's like I couldn't fathom being able to pay for the down payment and all the stuff we wanted to do and get the house we wanted to do. And he set the goal and said, we're going to do it this time. And last year we had like the biggest Q4, a campaign just came in. Like it's almost like higher power. Like again, I'm not a super
Right.
religious person, but like something out there in the universe where this is how much money I need to make the down payment on our house to get started. And we had a friend, a connection of ours said, hey, we have this offer. We want to do this burst sale campaign with you, a 4-day thing. We're going to double the CPA for you, give you 50% off. And we did like $500,000 in 4 days. Like
Wow.
wouldn't have fathomed. It wasn't on the radar a week before
Right.
and took a big distribution and paid for the house. It's really crazy how like those types of goals where it's just like this is when it has to happen. Like we're doing it.
Yeah.
If you're like motivated and driven, like it happens. I can't
Yeah.
explain it, but it does.
I totally am on the same page. What I would say though is that for me, I know I'm on the right track when like synchronicity happens,
Yeah.
like in some way, shape, or form, like the same person keeps coming up, or like just something like that. But I also have an interesting take on goals, and I wonder what you think about this because, like, and it came about like in this midlife crisis because like I'd achieved all my goals, right, and I wasn't happy, like, and I was like, okay, this is kind of messed up. Like, I thought I would be happy, I'm not, and I have some thoughts about that. Like, have you ever heard of like the be do have model?
I haven't. No.
Okay, so I was following a model that is do have be. I'm going to do certain things, right? Because I do those things, I'm going to get certain things, so
Okay.
I'll have them, right? And then I'll be certain things, successful, happy, whatever. Okay. I think that that's a good way of looking at things if you want to achieve. Like achievers, like that's, except like the end result is probably disappointment. The dreamers, right, are the people that have do be. Like if I knew what Max knew, or if I had like Max's courses, or if I knew what Rich knew, right, or if I had certain secrets, then I would do things and then I would be something, right?
Yeah.
Like, and like that's the antithesis of resourcefulness, right? Like, you know, and so the really the only way to do it right, where you don't lead to disappointment, is be do have. You got to be the person you want to be, like, and then do what it is you need to do to have what you want to have. But the having is not going to lead to you being anything, right? And so when I realized that like achieving goals really just made me happy for like a week or two, because that's like,
Hmm.
that's what and then it's like the hedonic treadmill. I'm right back to the same level of happiness. I then thought, well, that's kind of stupid, so I'm not going to have no goals, and that was even more stupid. uh, because then I had no reason to do anything, and I was even more depressed, so that really didn't work. And uh and then I started thinking about like, okay, like when do I feel most alive? Like, because that's what I was trying to get at. Like, I just wanted to like feel good and alive, like, and juiced. And I was like, okay, I feel most alive when I'm in pursuit of something. When I'm in pursuit is when I feel most alive. Like, and so really then that's what goals are for. It's much more so, I'm not saying anything new because like, people say it's the journey, not the destination. But for me, it's like it's the pursuit because the accomplishment really means nothing. So for me, like I've always thought since that point, right, the only purpose of a goal is to get me to engage with life right now. And if it does that, then it's the right goal. And if it doesn't do that, then it's not the right goal. And I've had clients like, so I took that learning forward, right? And I'd have clients that like their goal might have been like to, let's say, 10,000, so that'd be 50,000. So let's say they like their goal was to make $2.5 million,
Okay.
right? And or let's say, yeah, $2.5 million. And for whatever reason, that was not motivating to them, right? Like it just wasn't motivating. But like because I'm thinking of one client in particular, right? And I was like, well, what if we chunk that down? And he's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? And I'm like, well, I told him my philosophy, what I just told you, and I'm like, how would it be to make 10K a day? Like that's the goal. And as soon as you hit that goal for the day's over. Like he had a call center and stuff like that, like selling coaching program or whatever. I'm like, the day's over. Like you can check out as soon as that's done. And if you don't hit that goal, then you got to stay there as long as it takes to hit the 10K, right? So your goal each day is to hit the 10K. And believe it or not, like that shift for him was enough. Like now he was in like every day, it was like a game. How quickly can he get to that 10K? And some days he stayed all day and he made 100K, but other days like he didn't and he had to work it. But like for some reason, this 2.5 million at the end of the year, not motivating, right? But like 10,000 each day, which is the same amount of money, right? Like, is motivating. And so, yeah, so for me, that's how I judge my goals now. It really has nothing to do with the accomplishment, and it has everything to do with, does this get me excited enough to get out of bed and go for it? And if it does, it's right for me.
I
And
love
if
that.
it doesn't, then it's not right for me, you know?
Yeah. And that's interesting too, because I think when you break things down to daily or like even hour, like just like I got to do this hour, like it's exciting because the realization of whether you're hitting it or not hitting it
It's
is
real time.
instant.
Yeah.
It's real time. It's even if somebody did like my $2.5 million a year goal and today I did 20,000, it's still like I'm so far away. I don't feel like I'm making progress. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why, like one of my biggest gripes with I'm not going to name names, but like one of my biggest gripes with the style of marketing that a lot of the current kind of gurus are doing, the internet marketing, make money online. It's
Right.
very lifestyle focused. It's here's all my things, right? Here's all my cars, here's all my fancy things. And my problem, you're going to attract a certain group of people that are just really drawn to that, but most people are going to feel like they're not going to see the path, right? Like
Mhm.
going for where I am today, which is, let's say somebody's at, I make $50,000 a year and I have no prospect of how to increase that income, to owning a, fleet of Lamborghinis and Ferraris and a $5 million house. Like there's no visible way to get there. Whereas if I broke it down and showed you how to do something today that would get you excited and then do it tomorrow, the next day, like the momentum's there, the motivation's there. You're excited because now it's like a game, there's a challenge. Um, yeah, that's why they don't play like you don't have a baseball game that's 700 innings, right? Or a
Yeah.
football game that lasts a year. Like nobody would watch it because it's, oh, guess they're up this quarter, but like we got a year left to go. Nobody's gonna be engaged with that
Yeah.
type of format.
What makes me sad is that, like, because I've been in so many businesses as a coach, consultant, and stuff like that, and seen all the numbers, like, it makes me sad what people respond to.
Yeah.
Like, because, like, I've never done it. I've never done, like, the lifestyle play, right? Um, and yeah, and I don't drive any fancy cars, so that, like, I'd have to go rent them or something. But, like, but, I'm pretty wealthy. But, like, surprisingly, I've seen, like, the same people go try both, and that lifestyle always outpulls like the other, right? Like, and I'm the only way, maybe long term lifetime value is different, and that's totally possible. But 1 year timelines, lifestyle just trumps it, and it's like, and same thing with our list. Like when we mail our list, like an offer that is more biz oppy, like the more like I am like I won't send anything out I don't believe in, right? But then there's some things that I am 100% like I think everyone should have this, and then there are other things like this might be right for some people, right? Like that's, and the ones that I'm like this might be right for some people are more like short-term focus, let's say, and those always perform the best. They always perform the best, and I'm always like, son of a bitch, man, that just sucks, right? Like I make the money and that's cool, but like I'm just disappointed that like more people aren't willing to play like the longer game, and it's the same reason. Like I've always tracked like the people I learned from. Like who did you learn from, and who did you learn from, and who did you like? I wanted to get to like the original sources. Um, I guess just because of curiosity, and yeah, most people just want to be told what to do. That's it. They have no interest in like why something works or how it works or like, and I think they're at a disservice for that, you know. And I'm like the total opposite. I just want to understand how things work. I don't really care if you tell me what to do because I want to figure out how to do it. And there's, I guess, a part of a rebel in me that like even if you told me the way to do it, I'm going to try to do it a little bit differently because I want to make it my own.
Yep.
And that might not always be the best thing, but like it's like just like I don't know, this part of like rebellious part of me, which I guess is good for a guru because then I have stuff to teach because I'm doing stuff differently than others.
You have to,
But
yeah, you have to think that way.
yeah,
You have to be that way. Otherwise, yeah, you're just regurgitating other people's content at that point. If you don't put your own spin on it, right?
right.
So, I know we've been chatting for over an hour, and I want to be respectful of like your time and everything. And I know there was before we started talking, you said,
Okay.
"Hey, there's some stories that like I would love to share," and you gave me a great tease about an hour ago. It's kept me on the edge of my seat. So I would love to, totally off topic, but would
Right.
love to if you have some time to
Yeah,
share
yeah,
some of
I
those
do.
stories.
I do. Let me just check. I think my next one is at like 4, so I got plenty of time. Let me just confirm that.
Yeah, me too.
Uh, it's actually at 3:30, but I can go through this pretty quick.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Um, so, okay, yeah. So what I told you was that if I was writing a subject line about my childhood, it would be my childhood equals Goodfellas plus Wolf of Wall Street.
Yep.
And so, yeah, let me explain both. So when I was 13 or 12, there was a Billy Joel concert in Madison Square Garden, and I was going there with my friends on a Friday night. And we took the train into the city, and my dad owned racehorses. And so I thought I knew something about racehorses, which really I didn't. And I bought the track newspaper before we got on the train, and I was studying it, and I felt for some reason I knew the horses that were going to come in first and second in this one race, and I convinced my friends also that I knew. And so of these three horses, one was going to come in first and one was going to come in second. And so what we bet was an exacta box. So there's six combinations, right? Because there's three horses. One can come in first and then one can come in second, right? So out of the three, there's three that can come in first, and then there's only two that can come in second. So there's six combinations,
Yeah.
right? So I bet a $16 exacta box, which was $96, and my friends all bet their amounts. And then we went to the Billy Joel concert, and we won. Right. And it was like one of them was a long shot. So my $16 exacta box that cost me $96, I think got me like $3,500, $3,600. Wow. And I'm like 13.
Yeah,
right?
That's crazy.
17, right. And so, and my friends won a bunch of money, and it was a great night, and we went home and whatever. And, but now, like, I started going back to the OTB. We bet it in the OTB in Penn Station, which was right below Madison Square Garden. So I started going back to Penn Station and betting consistently, right? And winning consistently. But all luck. Like I thought I was a genius, but all luck. And at some point, I made some friends there. I always looked older than I was. And the guy, one of the friends said, you really shouldn't be betting with OTB because they take 5% off the top, right? Like than what the track pays. Mm-hmm. You should bet with a bookie. And I'm like, I don't have a bookie. And he's like, there's a bookie right there in the corner. And his name was Dominic. So I started betting with Dominic. And Dominic was 6'6", big guy, like a mafia guy. And started betting with him. And one night, I don't remember how long I was betting with him at this point, but at one night, I crushed it again. And I wiped Dominic out. Like, in fact, he doesn't have enough money to pay me. And so he says, look, kid, I don't even have enough to pay you today. But I own these stores. He had a shoe store right around the block for like weird size women, like, plus size, like weird sizes in shoes for women, like very small and very big. And he said, I have a shoe store, come there tomorrow and I'll give you the rest of the cash. And I didn't even know if he was like, if that was going to happen or not, but I really had no choice, the guy. And so, so the next day I came and I got the money and we started talking. And I guess it's that desire for a father figure again, right? This has become the theme of this call. We hit it off, right? And so now, like, started to be friends with him, and now I wasn't really betting with him anymore. But he was teaching me stuff stuff that he probably couldn't teach his son. And back home, my dad was never around. My mom, I got into a big fight with, and she's like, well, if you don't like it, leave. Like, this is my house, these are the rules. Like, if you don't like it, leave. So I didn't say anything. I just went into my bedroom, took all the cash that I had accumulated from like my betting and stuff like that.
Did they know that you were? Did your parents know that you were making all this money betting?
They knew that I had bet. My dad knew that I had bet that one night in Penn Station, but they didn't know that it was a pattern. Okay. Right? And so I called the cab to meet me like outside, like by my neighbor's house, and I just walked out of the house, didn't tell my mom I was leaving, and left, and then went into the city, saw Dominic, and I said I left home. I don't know where I'm staying or whatnot. He's like, oh, you can stay by me. I can't take you home or my wife will kill me, but I could put you out, like there's a hotel right around the corner and you could stay there for a couple nights. And then I did. And then I stayed in the city a couple nights. But Dominic was fixing horse races. And what Dominic was doing with his crew, and it was the Gambino crime family, what they were doing was they were paying jockeys not to come in first, second, and third. So they would take 5 jockeys, right? And they would give them money and also threaten them that if you come in first, second, or third, you're dead. And so the only people that knew who was coming in first, second, and third in any order were them, like the mafia guys, because they weren't paying the people to win. They were paying people to lose.
Yeah.
And no one knew who else was getting paid to lose, right? Like, so, and then they would bet all 3 of those combinations for trifectas. And they won a lot of money. And I was like, they would take me with them to the track, and like I would go fetch them like pizza or, corn on the cob or whatever they wanted. Like, hey, Richie, go get me, 2 slices of pizza, and they give me like 100 and just keep it, right? And they would let me bet on the things. And it ended because one night at Yonkers Raceway, we crushed it, like absolutely crushed it. And so much so that they ran out of hundreds and fifties by the time it was time to pay me. right? Like, like the whole racetrack, no more hundreds and fifties. These
Crazy.
guys had taken all of it. So I won $15,000 and they paid it off to me in 20s,
Wow.
like, which is like a ridiculous stack, right? And I never had that much cash, like, or that much in volume. And so that night when I got home, it was like two or three. Like I got home, I never had a curfew. Uh, I was just counting it over and over, like on my desk, like in piles. And my dad opened the door to my bedroom and saw the piles on my desk.
Oh shit.
He was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And he grabbed the money and he said, "Come into my office, like in a home office." And I told him what I was doing, and he's like, "Yeah, you're done with that, right?" But that's my Goodfellas story. And they were in the book Wise Guy. Goodfellas, the movie is based on Wise Guy, but those characters, they were part of that whole crew, but those characters weren't in the movie, but they're in the book. So that's my Goodfellas story. Then after school in my junior year in high school, I wanted to get a job, right? I wanted to make some extra money. And so I saw a job for this place called Investor Center, which was a stock brokerage firm, a penny stock firm, which totally soured me on, like, it's such a sleazy business. It's
Yeah.
disgusting, right? But so I got a job there working for Joe Nitty. That was his name. I ended up dating his sister like 10 years later, just coincidentally, like hilarious. But, and that was the place where Jordan Belfort got his first stock brokerage firm. So like when I watched The Wolf of Wall Street, that's not really how it went down. There was no, this guy, because before Jordan was working at Investor Center, which they portrayed in the strip mall,
Yep, I remember.
but it wasn't in a strip mall. It was actually in a regular office building. Um, he owned a meat business, like a meat distributorship or packing or something like that went bankrupt. And so he started at Investor Center, but he was that good. Like he could one call close everyone, like, and everyone else was like on a three call system. Like first get them on the phone, talk to them, get their permission, like when they found something to send them something, and then they'd call them a second time and say they found it. They're going to FedEx the prospectus, and they'll call them like the next day, and then on the third call they would close. Jordan would just call cold and close, and he was so good at it. He would come in for like 2 hours a day, close like two, three, or four people, call it a day, and leave. And then each month he'd post his like photocopy his check and put it on his cubicle so everyone would see how much money he was making. And it was six figures every month. And that's because like when you buy like $10,000 worth of a penny stock, the bid ask is like 25 cent, 50 cent. So immediately your stock is worth 5,000, even though you spent 10,000. And of the 5,000 that's left, like the 5,000 that disappears, 60% went to the broker if they hit certain levels, and 40% went to the house. So if you sold $10,000 worth of stock, right, you got $3,000 at like the broker, which is like so one-sided. So yeah, so like Jordan could make 10 grand a day coming in for an hour or two, closing three people, and then leaving, right? And and then I worked there for a year. I got all my friends' jobs there, right? Like, and then one day, like someone from corporate came in and they're like, "What are these kids doing here?" And they're like, "Oh, they're doing the direct mail campaigns for us. They're doing this kind of stuff." And he's like, "You can't have kids in a brokerage firm. Everyone has to be bonded and fingerprinted. Like we're dealing with people's money." And so like we all got fired, and I lost track of Jordan, right? But then I guess Investor Center got shut down, and that's when Jordan opened his own company, right? So I didn't see the go crazy years, but I saw him in his very first stock brokerage firm, and he really was that talented. It was amazing.
That's
Those are
crazy.
the stories that I got tons of stories like that, not all like that, but we'll save them for like maybe episode two.
I love it, man. Well, before we have to run, anything that you want to promote or share, not like promote, but like share with anybody if they want to find more about you. And I know we've done some cool stuff with
Yeah.
the coalition. So if you want to share anything about that, we'll drop links for everybody.
Yeah. We're currently like rebuilding our website, but what I would say is that like our website will have a lot of great stuff on it relatively soon. So that's strategicprofits.com.
Yep.
So it's just strategicprofits.com. And what Max was talking about is Steal Our Winners, which I think is like right now the bargain of the century. It won't stay that price, but right now people can get it for, I think it's $49 for a year. And it's each month, it's like 10 strategies that you probably wouldn't know to grow an online business, like, in media buying, promotion, all different kinds of things, really, from increasing conversion, increasing traffic, increasing cart value, etc. And yeah, and that's called Steal Our Winners. And if you type in "Steal Our Winners" in a search engine, you'll find it. Like I don't know what page it is. And every once in a while, I'll write a free report. I haven't done it in like quite a while, but I'm sure I will at some point again. And when I do, you should keep your eyes out because generally those things tend to reshift people's ideas of what's possible and what can be done online. And I'm sure I'll probably release one definitely in the next 18 months. I have a couple ideas percolating. So
Love it.
no hard sell there.
Well, we'll keep our eyes open for that one. So, Rich, it's always awesome to talk to you. We'll definitely have to do another episode